Morning. Sidena Kwashi, morning. Pauline, Patrick, morning. Catherine Ashby, Neil Francois, Anton Pai, morning. Cynthia, morning. I hope the reception is better on um, Facebook this morning. We were having some problems on Thursday. Diane, morning. Natalie Faria, good morning to you too as well. Back over to YouTube. Kathy Ann Best, good morning. Cheryl Seeley, Jennifer Ferron, Deborah Duranti, Eva Harris, Adirami X, good morning. Niabu, good morning. Donna Walcott. Morning, Carol. Yes, rain in Arima today, Carol. We're not complaining. Cynthia says, Clay, very good. Thank you. Nicole Caesar, morning. Annette Hunt, Alison Boyce. Hey, Alison, morning. Daniela Williams, morning, Val. Angela Kati, morning. Good. Richards. Right, so Carol says, hearing good on Facebook. Excellent. Eva Smith, morning. Annette Hunt, morning to all. Orlando Ashby, Janice Macaulay, morning. Good morning on this rainy Sunday morning. So the rainy season has been officially declared. So, in the words of what was this guy's name? That Robin Marach was the weatherman many years ago. Is alleged to have said, "Rain in the." Yes. For those of us who remember that incident where he was caught off camera. Christopher Serrett, morning, listening all the way from Florida. My second home, calling me. Well, I'm coming soon, no worry. Kurt Richards, Judy Kane, morning. Malka Rock, morning, Malka. Lenny Ramirez, morning. Maria Lyons. Freddie Williams, morning all, morning. Ruth Frontin, Ruth is hearing very well from Florida calling my mind. Phyllis Antoine, morning. Fancy shoot. Carol, if you know how old the shoot is, I inherited the shoot from my older brother. Who lives in Seattle, and he gave me the shoot before he migrated, and now since before 1997. Yeah, I was a teenager back then, early teens back then. Yeah. But I've kept it well. Arlene Lewis, morning. Natasha Martin, Alison Samuel, morning. They should may have originated from Florida. I'll check the label after that and see if it was made in America or where it was made. Morning, Sarah Richards. Yeah, so let's get into it, folks. It's already, what is the time? 11:03? Still early, man. Still have some time as people but we will see. Right, so I trust all is well, and as indicated, the title of today's live is Kamla, Clear and Present Danger, and I make no apologies for saying so, and I trust that the UNC supporters who are listening, you see, the purpose of this program is to provide truth, and the fact that you all keep coming back tells us that you're addicted to truth. Truth is very addictive, eh? Yes, it is. So we have a lot to discuss this morning. So for those of us who would have listened to the PNM public meeting on Thursday, there were some revelations made by the Prime Minister and former Attorney General, now Minister of Local Government and Rural Development, Faris Al-Rawi, which for me put a lot of things into perspective, but more than that, have raised a number of questions that the misleader of the opposition must be made to answer. And Dr. Rowley made a statement on Thursday that the media in this country have questions to answer, and he was very correct when he made that statement. Very, very correct, because Based on some of the things that we would have heard on Thursday night, the media should have been camping outside the office of Kamla Prasad Bisesa, or camping outside the Pink Palace in Philippines, or wherever, Parliament, or wherever it is. She is likely to have been on Friday to pose several questions to Mrs. Prasad Bisesa coming out of Thursday's public meeting in San Fernando. And I would have visited her page, her Facebook page, her official Facebook page, because I expected that she would have issued some response to the meeting, and in particular to Dr. Rowley's contribution, and that she did. But she failed in her press release to address a number of issues that were raised on the platform, which to my mind serves as an indictment against her party, and more than that, her government, and her prime ministership, and her leadership of the People's Partnership. And it only serves to reinforce the hypocrisy of Kamla Prasad Bisesa, but more than that, highlights the fact why she should never be prime minister in this country, ever again, right? Permit me first, folks, to play for you part 1 of the Mark Basant series entitled The Piarco Files. I know some of us may not have seen it. It's a 5-part series, so he gave us 1 part more than he did on Foster Cummings. And the UNC and the supporters would have had a lot to say about the series that was done on Foster Cummings. But insofar as the series on the Piarco Airport, which Kamla Prasad Bisesa describes as a 25-year PNM smear campaign designed to make the UNC look corrupt, there are nothing to say. No press conference call, no press statement put out to comment on that series and the revelations made in that series. I always say, here we are, 8 years after they demitted office in 2015. 25 years since this matter has been ongoing. And we are still learning new information, new details about the extent of the corruption that took place in that project, and by extension, the corruption that took place between 2010 and 2015 in an attempt to cover up that corruption and to protect the people who were the main players in that project, right? So let me get this here first. Let me play this here for you all first. This is part 1. Maybe we'll go through the whole 5-part series over the course of, but for now we're dealing with part 1, right? So listen to this. 6. Let me get this here. Play. Why this thing doesn't want to play now? Just now, give me 1 second. It was playing just now. I tested it, right? And this is primarily for the benefit of those who may not have heard it. All right, so that's part 4, 5, 2, 1. Why isn't this playing? Murphy's Law, boy. Murphy's Law. So I'm going to try this. Right, Piarco Files, part 1. Okay, go in, unmute. Nice.
The 19-year-old Piarco Airport civil corruption case came to an end in March this year, with Steve Ferguson, former Finance Minister Brian Quaitong, and Raul Gutierrez Jr. all being found guilty by a 6-member jury and later ordered to pay the state of Trinidad and Tobago US $131 million or 893 million TT. The state alleged that the 3 defendants conspired to corrupt the bidding process on 2 construction packages, C9 and C13, and the maintenance contract for Piarco Airport. During the course of the month-long trial, several co-conspirators and the state fingered Steve Ferguson as the mastermind, the influence, the man in charge, and pulling the strings of the fraudulent scheme beginning in August 1996. Ferguson, in his deposition submitted to the Miami court through his lawyers, was asked over 480 questions about the allegations leveled against him connected to the Piarco Airport scandal. but he pleaded the fifth under the US Constitution. In other words, he refused to answer. In detailed documents obtained from the US courts by TV6 News, the co-conspirators, some of who were jailed for their part in the scheme after entering the agreements, spilled the beans about Ferguson, who they say engineered secret meetings, kickbacks, and hidden offshore bank accounts to profit from the project. Eduardo Hillman Waller, a director of Burke Hillman Consultants, said in his deposition that he understood that Ferguson, Ishgal Baransing, and Brian Quaitung had switched their allegiance from the PNM to the UNC and that they had financed the UNC election. Hillman Waller also added, open quote, this party was supported by Ferguson, Quaitung, and Gal Baransing, and I think to the best of my recollection, that is where Gal Baransing and Ferguson met, his quote. In fact, co-conspirator Ronald Burke in his deposition indicated that, open quote, Gutierrez told Hillman that they were back in the game after the election in Trinidad in November 1995. Hillman told me that he heard through Gutierrez that Ferguson was a big player in the election process for one of the parties, designing the strategy that helped them get elected, close quote. And while Burke Hillman consultants were excited at the prospect of being chosen to do the Piarco Airport Extension project, Ronald Burke said while they were in the bidding process, Ferguson sent a warning. Open quote, it meant he had been monitoring them and making sure if they tried to do something, he would try to stop it. He put roadblocks in their way if he could, close quote. Burke said in his deposition, open quote, we agreed to pay Ferguson in late 1996. On reflection, I know that the process, while legitimate, was probably attractive to Ferguson because it is more subject to be influenced to allow favoritism, close quote. Attorney James Robinson, who represented the Trinidad and Tobago government in addressing the jury prior to the verdict, summed it up stating, open quote, that's one way to create roadblocks. You design a process where your buddies, the middlemen in the conspiracy, the corrupt Burke Hillman, are allowed to pick their favorites. Didn't matter how much it cost, as long as they can get the contract and pay the money to their other cronies, close quote. Hillman Waller emphasized that it was Ferguson calling the shots, as he mentioned in his deposition, that during the airport project, Gutierrez, Gal Baransing, Burke, and others, including himself, worked under the direction of Ferguson. Hillman Waller said, open quote, Ferguson served as a protector for Burke Hillman Consultants and the government, close quote. Prior to the government setting up an interministerial task force in September 1996 for the Piarco and Crown Point airports, Ronald Burke in his deposition spoke about Ferguson's close relationship with Amir Idu, the then chairman of the Airports Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Burke confirmed in response to a question that, open quote, Mr. Ferguson had told him that one of the reasons for the delay moving forward with the Piarco project was to, quote unquote, get the right guy in place of Jackman. It was Idu who would eventually take over for Jackman? Right, Burke said. So, how did the scheme go down with the task force in place that included Idu and then TIDCO's chairman Ishgal Baransing? Two companies were invited to present for the contract, and they were Scott & Associates Architects Incorporation and Burke Hillman. Hillman Waller said before the presentations, Ferguson gave them the firm assurance they would win the bid. Open quote, prior to the presentation, I met with Ferguson and Gutierrez. Others may have been present too in Miami, and at that meeting, Ferguson assured me that Burke Hillman Consultants would be awarded the contract for design and consulting services at the Piarco Airport, close quote. In fact, Hillman Waller said Ferguson went even deeper to give assurances. Open quote, I had conversation with Ferguson. The project is going to be revived and you are going to bid. And unless you piss on the table, your project was the best representation. We expect you to win, close quote. In essence, Burke Hillman was picked beforehand, State Attorney James Robinson had argued in his closing arguments to the jury. Hillman Waller's partner, Ronald Burke, in his deposition, confessed that they had been provided with insider tips by Ferguson to ensure that they secured the multi-million-dollar Piarco Airport expansion contract. Open quote, Ferguson said, don't muddy up the water on the issue of financing. Ferguson also advised to be vague on the procurement issue. Ferguson suggested that local firms be involved. During the process, we faxed narratives for the presentation to Ferguson for comment, and he provided comments and recommendations, close quote. Burke later admitted that Ferguson got to see drafts of what they intended to put before the committee. Burke added in his deposition, open quote, "We knew in general what was going on, but not the specifics. So this was helpful to us in focusing on what the new government's desires were," close quote. While several government ministers were present for the Burke-Hillman presentation, including Quaitong, they weren't present for Scott and Associates, according to the evidence presented in court. The same night after they had presented to the Interministerial Committee, Ronald Burke revealed their first secret meeting with Ferguson. He said that Ferguson, through Hillman, invited him to dinner and to meet Galvaransing and then Finance Minister Brian Quaitong. Ronald Burke said he and Hillman were picked up at the Hilton Hotel by Ferguson, who later picked up Galvaransing, and they drove to Quaitong's house for dinner. Open quote, attorney, "And they all said you were selected?" Burke, "Yes." Attorney, "It was common knowledge in the room you were discussing the fact that Burke-Hillman had won?" Burke, "Yes." Close quote. In November 1996, the task force submitted an interim report to Cabinet recommending the appointment of Hillman as lead consultant for the project and that implementation of such should be fast-tracked as recommended by Hillman. Burke said Ferguson ensured that they emphasized that they could complete the project in 18 months. Open quote. "Yes," he said, "that's important to bring out to the task force." Close quote. Former Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi, who was questioned by the state, was asked whether there had been any disclosure about this secret meeting that took place between Burke-Hillman, Ferguson, Galvaransing, and Quaitong. Al-Rawi answered in the negative, saying not in the cabinet minutes, nor in the notes which were attached to the minutes. Tomorrow, in part 2, Ferguson names his price. Mark Bassant, TV6 News.
Quite a mouthful there, right? That is just part 1 of 5 parts. And there's some interesting points that were made in this, in just that one clip there, that Mr. Ferguson and the players from Burke-Hillman and all of these, what was that? That they indicated they are back in the game after the election of 1995. They're back in the game. Ferguson was a big player in the party, and he designed the strategy to get the UNC elected in 1995. Remember, it was 17-2, and the NAR gave their 2 seats to the UNC, enabling them to form government. Right? So he was a big player. He designed the strategy, Ferguson. So we know that he was playing a significant role in directing the UNC. Right? Also, too, there was a meeting at the home of Brian Quaitong, who was then Minister of Finance. He was the minister at the time, but you meeting with the proposed contractors or even the bidders, one of the bidders, so that ministers were present at the meeting for Burke-Hillman, but they weren't present for the meeting for the other potential bidder who was not involved in the whole bacchanal and who was not part of the racket, right? And then Faris Al-Rawi indicating that there was nothing in the cabinet notes, cabinet minutes that indicated or spoke to this meeting, this private meeting that was held at the home of the Minister of Finance. But you see, they want to talk about recusal and Faris Al-recusal and how much time Stuart Young recused himself. They love to talk that talk. No recusals taking place here, right? So when there's one, I think his name is William Granger, who loves to comment and post stuff on our Debunking UNC Lies page on Facebook. And all he always talking about is 500 recusals and PNM how much recusals and the UNC 0 recusals, and so the PNM corrupt. You see, the UNC didn't care to recuse themselves, even though there's a record, and it's coming soon, don't worry, of the few recusals that they also that they would have had. Remember, the first person fired in the People's Partnership Administration was Mary King. Why? For the simple reason that her son bid for a contract for something that fell under her ministry. And it is alleged that she put her personal assistant to sit in on the tender evaluation process, right? Despite the fact that her son was one of the bidders. She didn't know about recusal then. And for that, she got her throat burst. But we know that it's only because they wanted to pretend as if they were about transparency and decency. It was to protect the image of the partnership, but it really didn't. if that didn't come out, Mary King would have served her 5 years as a minister, because Kamala really didn't care, as we will discuss shortly. So that was just part one. And the amount of information that just came out there, things that we didn't know about before, this meeting that the Minister of Finance had with one of the contractors, the eventual company that was selected to get the project, right? They have a minister meeting. He didn't tell cabinet, or at least we don't think so. But it wasn't officially minuted. So it's possible he may have had a discussion with the cabinet, but we can't put that in the minutes because it will be recorded there. And essentially what we'll be doing is providing evidence. So if it is we are voted out of office and the PNM comes back in, they would have evidence to nail us to the cross. So we cannot put that in the minutes, right? So whoever taking minutes for the thing, hey, don't put that there. Don't put that in there. You understand? Leave that out. Right. So let me read some stuff here for you all. I'll get this one first. This is an article from the Express dated the 19th of May 2004. Right? 21 years ago. Not 21. 19 years ago. From here is, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Former government ministers, key financiers of the United National Congress, the political party itself, and several other business people conspired together and allegedly formed ghost companies which collected millions of dollars from the airport's authority for work not done during the construction of the new Piarco airport terminal. And the money gained was then allegedly split among themselves. You hear that? Financiers of the United National Congress and the political party itself. The political party itself. Kamala tells you that this was a 25-year-old PNM smear campaign designed to make the UNC look corrupt. This forms the genesis of the new charges laid against 8 of the named alleged conspirators who appeared in court yesterday, some of whom are already before the court on other unrelated charges relating to the same project. Former Finance and Tourism Minister Brian Quaitom, his companion Rene Pierre, chairman of Northern Construction Limited and former chairman of TIDCO Ish Galbaransing, former chairman of Maritime Financial Group Steve Ferguson, former chairman of the National Insurance Property Development Company Limited, NIPDEC, Edward Bailey, finance manager of NCL Amrit Maraj, and former chairman of the Airports Authority, Emir Idu, and Tyrone Gopi appeared in court in 2 batches and were all released on bail. A 2.5-year investigation led by the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau, assisted by a team of forensic accountants. You see the extent that they went to in this investigation that Prasad Bisasa tells you is a 25-year-old PNM smear campaign designed to make the UNC look corrupt, including Canadian Robert Lindquist, allegedly traced the movement of millions of dollars, some of which was used towards the credit card account of Brian Quaitom, while a substantial sum was used to purchase properties in Florida. But the supporters are asking, where it have assets? Them men and them have no assets, they hiding their assets. All right. Go ahead. They were jointly charged with conspiring between January 1st, 1995, January 1st, 1995, and December 31st, 2001, with 5 other persons not yet charged, and 5 companies to obtain contracts and payments of settlements of a total face value of up to $1.6 billion, consisting of the cost of the Piarco Airport design and project management. Right, so I said I'm not going to read the whole thing. There was one other part I wanted to read here. Right. The conspiracy charge alleges that a former government minister, Idu and Galbaransing, were appointed to lead a task force to fast-track the construction of the project, which was being managed by Burke Hillman Consultants, who had the responsibility of awarding lucrative contracts and evaluating the bidders. However, the charges allege that Northern Construction made a false claim when it stated that it was acting on behalf of a consortium comprising of Northern Construction Limited, York Structures, and Kusals Construction Company in obtaining the contracts, and the consultants tailored the consortium bid, although NCL did not meet the requirements of having the required asset base. The conspiracy, involving 3 companies of the Maritime Group, alleges that they purported to use fake bonds vouching for the financial independence of NCL in the award of several multi-million-dollar contracts. And it went further to allege that Ferguson, Galbaransing, and Gutierrez, these are the 3 men who are, right, formed an undisclosed business partnership with secret offshore banking arrangements. Offshore banking arrangements, they buy property in Florida with your taxpayers' dollars. Your taxpayers' dollars, right? Pay for properties in Florida, and money going into overseas bank accounts, offshore bank accounts. The same charge alleges that former government minister Brian Quaitong, Edu, Galbaran Singh, Bailey, Gopi, former executive director of NIPDEC, Trevor Romano, now deceased, and another person abused their public office by accepting corrupt personal and political payments or career enhancement in return for public contract awards and administrative decisions favoring the return, or rather the foreign consultants, NCL, Kalmaquip Engineering Corporation. So the first issue here is that millions of your taxpayers' dollars, my taxpayers, but it wasn't mine, because back when that happened, I wasn't working, right? I was still in school. Millions of your taxpayers' dollars went into the bank accounts of these individuals through a most elaborate and intricate scheme that apparently was planned even before the election, even before the general election in 1995, right? And Kamla Prasad Bisesa was a major player in that government. The government which, as we heard there, Steve Ferguson played an intricate and integral role in designing the strategy for that party to win the election in 1995. So they said, right, he leave PNM, he used to support the PNM, he left the PNM and went across to the UNC. He realized he can't make no headway in the PNM. Yeah? If you're corrupt and you are about corruption, forget it. Yes, I no chance there. Quaitong, good in the PNM, you know, serve his time, right, under Mr. Manning, no problems, no issues. As soon as the PNM lost the election, he said he didn't take no vow of poverty, he gone across to the UNC, right? Because that party, the environment in that party facilitates corruption. As I always say, you cannot spell the word corruption without the letters UNC, right? So he found an environment that favored and that was able to nurture their propensity to thief. But Mrs. Prasad Bisesa maintains that that is a 25-year PNM smear campaign designed to make the UNC look corrupt. Now, there were 3 revelations on Thursday night that to me was startling and puts a lot of stuff into perspective. One, the fact that the restitution was paid to Trinidad and Tobago, millions of US dollars was paid between 2010 and 2015 as part of monies that the 5 persons, the 5 foreigners who pled guilty, who paid restitution and made jail in the US for this project that Prasad Bisesa tells you is a 25-year-old PNM smear campaign designed to make the UNC look corrupt. Millions of US dollars in restitution, cash and kind, assets, property, physical, tangible assets, came to Trinidad and Tobago between 2010 and 2015, was given to the government at the time, led by Kamla Prasad Bisesa, and the citizens of this country were never told that that money was received. It's only on Thursday night, when that disclosure was made by the Prime Minister, that this money was received. So the government, led by Kamla Prasad Bisesa, received money from men who confessed to taking part in what Bob Lindquist described as the greatest act of fraud and corruption ever perpetrated on the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago by its government. Bearing in mind the fact, this is the same Bob Lindquist that was retained by the NAR to go after O'Halloran. The same Bob Lindquist who investigated O'Halloran and was able to get back money from O'Halloran. When we got that restitution under the NAR, the country was informed. But this money, we weren't told about, right? We weren't told about it. More than 8 years later, we're now finding out about that money that was paid. Her supporters are going to ask, well, where the money went? But they know that the PNM get money from here, there, and everywhere to deal with COVID, and they want to know where that money went. But the millions in US that we received between 2010 and 2015 that we never hear about, they're not interested to know where that money went, what it's spent on, and who gets it. All right? But if a country, yes, they love country too bad, and the PNM is the most corrupt party it ever had, and this is the most corrupt government. Where is the PNM equivalent of the Piarco airport scandal? Where is it? Any of you UNC supporters who listen could point me to where I could find that? Help me now. I beg you. Please. Right? So that was one. Two, Faris Al-Rawi made the disclosure that he pointed out the fact that between 2010 and 2015, he was told by the lawyers, the US lawyers representing Trinidad and Tobago in the civil suit that between 2010 and 2015, they were not able to get instructions from Anand Ramlogan, the Attorney General, to proceed with this matter. This case in which Trinidad and Tobago, the citizens, the taxpayers, they love to use that term taxpayers, stood to gain close to $1 billion+. Because aside from the civil suit, we had the restitution money that we get. So it's over $1 billion. Over $1 billion. And between 2010 to 2015, based on what Faris said on Thursday night, right? That despite their best efforts, the attorneys could not get the man who is responsible for handling civil litigation on behalf of the government, refused to give them instructions to proceed. So imagine, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is the plaintiff. You initiated civil suit against these men, against this company. And now, when the case is being called for hearing, the attorneys representing the plaintiff, Trinidad and Tobago, the government, and by extension, the citizens, have nothing to present because they don't know what to do, how to proceed, because the man who they're supposed to take instruction from, the client, the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, refuses to speak with them, refuses to give them any instructions on how to proceed. And therefore, he is the man who has to arrange to tell them, well, this is what you need to do, this is, right? And he needs to take the note to cabinet in order to pay the attorneys as well. So if you're not communicating with them, then you're paying them. And if you're not paying them, then they can't do nothing. Because they don't know if it is you, how you want to proceed. If you want to proceed, because they were retained by another government and another attorney general. And they would assume, because they're from the US, that given the quantum of money involved and the potential benefit to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, that notwithstanding the fact that it's a new government, you would want to follow through on this case to ensure to see it through fruition, because it's plenty money we're talking about. 5 years, 2 attorneys general, Ramlogan, Gavin Nicholas. Neither one, according to what Faris said, saw it fit to communicate with the US attorneys, putting the case in jeopardy. Because if every time the case called, the attorneys come to the court and say, well, we can't proceed because we don't have instructions from the client, the plaintiff, the person who initiated the lawsuit. Then it created an environment or an excuse for the defendants, Steve Ferguson, Brian Quaitong, and Gutierrez, to petition the court to throw out the matter. Because if the plaintiff, the complainant, is no longer interested in proceeding with the case, then why are we here? You all are forcing us to pay law fees, legal fees that we shouldn't be paying, and wasting our time because the plaintiff not presenting the case. So we are fortunate that the US court afforded us the forbearance of that 5 years and didn't throw out that matter and put us in a monkey pants where after millions of dollars had been spent in legal fees up until that point in time in pursuing the case, that those legal fees could have gone down the drain and the case could have been thrown out, and we would not today be celebrating the possibility of receiving at least $1 billion in restitution. But the same Kamla Prasad Bisesa, who was Prime Minister between 2010 and 2015, right, who's Attorney General, facilitated that whole situation. A couple months ago, on the Monday Night Forum platform, expressing concern that the matter could be thrown out, the matter could be dismissed, and all the millions of dollars spent in taxpayers' money and legal fees could go down the drain because the Attorney General and the law firm Sequel Law were disqualified because the Attorney General, as she said, lied on the affidavit. And your money, your taxpayers' money, could go down the drain, and there's a real possibility that this case could be thrown out after all this time and all this money spent. But when she was Prime Minister, between 2010 to 2015, based on what Faris told us on Thursday night, she wasn't concerned about the case being thrown out. She wasn't concerned about taxpayers' money going down the drain. No. First question Prasad Bisesa has to answer. Were you aware that your Attorney General refused to communicate with the attorneys in the US on this matter? Were you aware of that? And if you were aware, what did you do to compel him to communicate and give instructions to the attorneys on how to proceed with the matter. Because this is a serious case. And if it is that you knew and you did not, and you did nothing to compel him to do his job and to oversee the well-being of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, that to my mind constitutes an attempt to pervert the course of justice. And the question must be asked, was it deliberate? Was the decision not to communicate with the US attorneys and not to give them instructions on how to proceed and basically take a hands-off approach with respect to the civil suit for 5 years, 3 months, and 14 days, a deliberate attempt to have the matter thrown out by the US court to save Steve and Brian and Gutierrez from having to pay the money that the court has now instructed them to pay as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago? Were you aware that that had happened? Bearing in mind the fact that as Attorney General in 2001, what your track record was with respect to this case, that when you became Attorney General after Ramesh Maharaj was fired by Prime Minister Pandey, because Mr. Maharaj was insistent on continuing the investigation, not only into this project, but several other projects as well, and he was fired. The ACIB was removed from under the office of the Attorney General and placed under the office of the Prime Minister with respect to this investigation. The Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago took a decision to stop providing money and funding to the ACIB to continue the investigation. That the first thing Mrs. Prasad Bisesa did when she became Attorney General wasn't to read the file, the interim report from Bob Lindquist, to determine what was the status of the investigation and to see the evidence that he had gathered before, to go to Cabinet to get funding to continue the investigation or to re-engage Mr. Lindquist. Because as you recall, Mr. Lindquist conducted a preliminary report over 2 months because it was 2 months before the general election. And there was a possibility that the PNM could have won the 2000 election, in which case his contract would have come to an end because his services were retained by Ramesh Maharaj, UNCAG. And therefore, if the PNM wanted to engage him, they could do so. So he did an interim report, but she couldn't understand that when she came in as Attorney General asking, why is it an interim report when how much money spent? So Carl Hudson Phillips had to write to her and school her on that, right? But the only thing she was concerned about when she became Attorney General with respect to this investigation, this matter, was what was the procedure that Ramesh used to retain the services of Bob Lindquist and Carl Hudson Phillips. Because she was of the view that it should have been tendered, and because it wasn't tendered, that essentially the conversation was headed on the road, well, we need to fire these 2 men, right? And both of them had to let her know, well, you don't need to fire us, we put it in our contract that our work, we will only do work up until 2 days or 3 days before the general election, because we understand that government could change hands and therefore the new government may not want our services. So don't fight up as to how you could fire us. We fire ourselves, effective 3 days before the general election of the year 2000. And we've discussed before, why was that her main concern? You have a report in front of you from the man who investigated O'Halloran, so you knew his competence. You would have read this report as the Attorney General, and you would have seen the amount of corruption that he would have uncovered in just the space of 2 months. But you weren't concerned to advise the Cabinet to continue the investigation, to get to the bottom of the racket. No. Instead, you're looking for ways to fire the investigator and legal counsel to the investigator. You're looking to see how to end funding to the ACIB to bring the entire investigation to an end. We now hear that Steve Ferguson was instrumental in funding the campaign of the UNC in 1995, and he designed the campaign strategy for them to win the election in 1995. So he was a major player, and therefore monies had to be repaid. And in the other 4 parts of this series, when you hear the extent to which Mr. Ferguson is alleged to have gone and all the underhand things that he did in order to ensure that his team got the contract to build the airport. The intricate scheme, this was something well planned. This isn't something I just come up with. There's something that required a protractor and what's this other thing? Compass and all of them different things. All kind of mathematical equations to come up with a scheme like this. We would hear in part 4 of the series where when the new general manager of NIPDEC, when she came in, who was one of the witnesses in the matter, when she saw all the underhanded things that was taking place, and she started to ask questions, they sent her to St. Lucia to oversee projects in St. Lucia. Who was authorized to do that? Right? It's only the line minister, Corporation Sole, under whom NIPDEC falls, could do that. The Minister of Finance. Right? The board, instructed by the Minister of Finance, are the only entities that have the power to tell the general manager of NIPDEC, we're sending you to St. Lucia. All of a sudden, she's doing a good job in Trinidad, I don't know. But all of a sudden, no, they decide, we're sending her to St. Lucia. We have projects there that require her special skills, so that all the questions that she's asking and the digging that she's doing needs to end. And the only way to do that is send her to St. Lucia and other Caribbean countries where it is that they have projects. Let her deal with that. But Prasad Bisesa tells you that this is a 25-year-old PNM smear campaign designed to make the UNC look corrupt. But she have other questions to answer. When was this money paid? How was it paid? How much did we receive in restitution? Because Faris also told us on Thursday night that when he became Attorney General and he went to the office of the Attorney General, his personal office, there was a painting on the wall that was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he asked, what is this painting? What, something about the painting struck him. And he was told by officials in the ministry that that painting was part of the asset that was returned to Trinidad and Tobago as part of the restitution paid by one of the men who pled guilty. And he was made to pay $22 million in restitution. Cash and kind. Under whose authority did the Attorney General take that painting, which was part of the restitution paid to Trinidad and Tobago? So he's the Attorney General. He see the painting and thought, oh, I like that boy. That going in my office. Really? That's how it works? Is there an inventory, a list of all the things that we received? Were there any other paintings valued hundreds of thousands of dollars that was also sent back to Trinidad and Tobago, which we may not know about? Because since the government didn't see it fit to tell the population, we got restitution, and this is what we got. It would have been very easy for officials of the UNC People's Partnership, to take whatever they wanted. In the same way Ram Logan took this picture and put it in his personal office as Attorney General. Were there any other paintings of value that might have ended up in the home or homes of UNC officials that we don't know about, that are valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars? Because since a man could just see a painting and say, I want that, and just take it just so, because he's the Attorney General, did they take any of the millions in restitution, US millions that we got? Where did that money go to? What was it spent on? And why was the country not told? So we need to know, we need to see the inventory list of all the items received, so we could determine that all of the very expensive artworks or anything else of value, tangibly, that we got, that it is still in the possession of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and not sitting in the homes, the private homes of any of the officials from that administration. She needs to tell us that. This is not the first time that Faris Al-Rawi has made this claim, that between 2010 to 2015, absolutely nothing was done to advance this case by the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago and the Attorney General. It is not the first time he has made that claim. And on no occasion on which Faris Al-Rawi has made that claim has anybody from the People's Partnership come out and said Faris lied. There has been no denial by Kamla Prasad Bisesa, not by Annan Ram Logan, not by Gavin Nicholas, or any other official from the People's Partnership. And in the absence of said denial, the assumption could be made that what is being said is very true. In fact, when you read Prasad Bisesa's press release from Friday, a commentary on Thursday's meeting, the only mention she made of what the Prime Minister said and what Faris said is that the Prime Minister is using a 25-year-old issue to campaign. He's campaigning on a 25-year-old issue. She failed to address all of those claims that were made by the Prime Minister and the former Attorney General. When the Prime Minister said the media in this country have questions to answer, he is right. Because no media house has seen it fit so far, as far as I'm aware. We should have been hearing on the news during the course of the day on Friday night that efforts to reach Mrs. Prasad Bissessa for comment on the claims made by Faris Al-Rawi and Keith Rowley have proven futile. That's what we should have heard, indicating to us that efforts have been made to get commentary from Mrs. Prasad Bissessa, answers with respect to those claims, and she does not wish to answer. We ain't see that, we ain't hear that, right? So we can only assume that the media is not interested in getting Mrs. Prasad Bissessa to speak on that issue. Let me take you all back. 2010, when they came into office, right? We didn't even observe the anniversary of the victory. They never never taught victory from May the 24th, 2010, went last week, right? Without a whimper. But we know for the 5 years that they were in office, every year was a big bram. They have big party, big concert in Arang West to celebrate never see, come see, never thought. We never thought we would get into office. Your taxpayers' money jumping up for them to bring down this register and that register to try and convince the young people to vote for them. Yeah? Money spending a lavish, they didn't care. 5 years. When they came in 2010, let me tell you, early on, what was the perspective of Anand Ramlogan with respect to Ish and Steve. This was when he still had some modicum of decency. Yeah. This is a Reuters article, right? Reuters. October 10, 2010. Entitled Trinidad Pair to be tried in the US over airport fraud. Port of Spain, Reuters. Trinidad and Tobago's Attorney General has cleared the extradition to the United States of 2 local businessmen wanted on fraud and corruption charges relating to the construction of Trinidad's $1.6 billion Piarco International Airport. In a ruling made public at the weekend, Attorney General Anand Ramlogan said Ishwa Galbaran Singh and Steve Ferguson should be tried in the United States on multiple charges, including money laundering against them. The two have been on bail since 2006. In 2006, a grand jury in Florida indicted Galbaran Singh, Ferguson, and 6 US businessmen for alleged corrupt practices concerning airport terminal construction contracts in the Caribbean oil and gas producer. The Americans pleaded guilty in a Florida federal court and were sentenced to terms between 6 months and 6 years. Ramlogan said in his statement he was convinced, hear this, he was convinced that Steve Ferguson and Ishwa Galbaran Singh will receive a fair trial in the United States of America, and the interest of justice is best served by their extradition to the United States of America. He goes on to say, it is important that these serious allegations be tried as soon as possible. It is right that they be tried in the United States of America, where they will either be acquitted or convicted. This was Anand Ramlogan in October of 2010. What was responsible for the complete 180-degree turn, where just a few months later, he seemed to change his mind? Just a few months later, all of a sudden, he's like, nah, I feel they'll get a fair trial in Trinidad instead of no. Yeah, you see what I just said there? Scratch that. Forget that. Where I indicated that I think that the trial will best be served in the US, I changed my mind. I wonder if the 2 checks that Jack Warner claimed he saw, totaling $8 million to facilitate Section 34, had anything to do with that about turn, that sudden change of heart. I just asking a question. That $8 million, remember Jack told us in 2015 that he saw 2 checks from Ish Galbaran Singh and Steve Ferguson that was intended to facilitate Section 34. What was of interest to me is the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that Mr. Warner made that statement, Kamla didn't sue him, Ferguson didn't sue him, Galbaran Singh didn't sue him. None of them. Such a damaging claim. And not one of them sued Jack Warner. We're going again. Anand Ramlogan is still before the courts today on another charge that is still pending, that of witness tampering and attempting to pervert the course of justice, where he's accused of attempting to bribe PCA director David West to withdraw his witness statement in a lawsuit that Ramlogan brought against Dr. Rowley with respect to statements that Dr. Rowley had made concerning Ramlogan's possible involvement in the whole Section 34 affair, right? Ramlogan sued Dr. Rowley, and Dr. Rowley called on David West to serve as one of his witnesses in his capacity as the former director of the Central Authority. The Central Authority is the entity that is responsible for the conduct of extraditions in Trinidad and Tobago. And Mr. David West, at the time that the People's Partnership came in 2010, was the director. He was the man in charge of the Central Authority. In that witness statement, Mr. West details all of the work that he and his department would have done up till 2010 to ensure that Ish and Steve were extradited. And then he details all of the things that Anna and Ram Logan did to frustrate that process. Decisions that Ram Logan took to prevent Ish and Steve from being extradited. Decisions which he, David West, could not understand. Decisions and information which, if it came out in the public domain, would have people questioning whether Section 34 was really a mistake. Ask yourself, why was Anna and Ram Logan so antsy, so gung-ho to have that witness statement withdrawn? What was it in that witness statement that was so damning that he was willing to risk his career, his job, and his reputation, and perhaps his freedom to get David West to rescind or to withdraw that witness statement? It was that witness statement that caused him to lose his work in 2015. So important was it to him to have that witness statement withdrawn that is alleged he called David West, he called Gary Griffith and asked Gary to call David and ask David to withdraw the statement. He tried to bribe David to convince him to withdraw the witness statement by telling him the government would give its support for he, David, to be appointed the director of the Police Complaints Authority, which he is today. Now, I've been trying to find the witness statement to read the contents for you. And I can't find it on the internet because I imagine it was probably removed because it now forms part of the evidence in a criminal case, right? Which is the lawsuit which is the case that Ram Logan still has to answer in the court. So even though he probably gets away for now with respect to the Nelson issue, he's still before the court on this witness tampering issue, and he's trying to see if he could get off by claiming that the judge who issued the warrant for the police to be able to access his phone records, right, as proof that he called David West, as proof that he called Gary Griffith on the dates when they said he called them. He is claiming that Gillian Lucky, who is the judge that issued the warrants, that she has some vendetta against him, right? And as such, that is why she issued the warrants, or she signed off on the warrants as an act of revenge. That's the claim. So that is what they're fighting now, which is why the matter still tied up. But I digress for a little bit, right? So he wanted this witness statement to be withdrawn. I would have read this witness statement on air in 2015 when we were still doing the Sunshine Hour program. And from my recollection, the contents of that witness statement was extremely damning. And it put a lot of things into perspective with respect to the actions that were taken. What I was able to find, however, is an article in which Dr. Rowley commented and quoted some of the contents of that witness statement by Mr. David West. Let me just see if I could get it here. And this is an article dated, I like to quote my sources, so they can't say a lie while making things up. This is The Guardian, dated the 25th of March, 2015. Title of the article, Rowley, it was a Section 34 act of panic. Opposition leader Dr. Keith Rowley yesterday said the decision to have a motion of no confidence against him was an act of panic by the Prime Minister, who was committed to terrorizing David West, a key witness for Rowley in a defamation matter brought by former Attorney General Anna Ram Logan. He made the comment during a press conference by the PNM after its MPs walked out of the parliamentary debate. Right. This is Dr. Rowley speaking here. The Prime Minister has been relentlessly, including today, seeking to destroy Mr. West. Rowley said, adding that the government had used the parliament in a most frightening way to terrorize and discredit Mr. West. He said, however, that the PM must answer questions about the Section 34 fiasco based on what has happened here today. We are now convinced that this is all about the quality of David West's testimony in court. Rowley said citizens must now ask themselves, why is the Prime Minister working so hard in defense of Anna Ram Logan? He immediately provided the answer, saying the reason is that David West's testimony, if it survives in the court, then it would mean that the government of Kamla Prasad Bisasa should have been out of office since August 2012, when it proclaimed the controversial section of the Administration of Justice, Indictable Proceeding Bill 2011. He said that the provision would have allowed businessman Ish Galbaransing and Steve Ferguson, who were wanted for extradition to the US, to escape the court hearing about the matter relating to the airport development project. Rowley said Prasad Bisasa should say whether she was aware of any attempt to have West withdraw his testimony in the extradition of the two men. He said the PM must also say whether she had any part to do with the allegations of witness tampering against the Attorney General, because the Prime Minister's behavior is curious and frightening. Hear this. He said in West's witness statement, West, in his witness statement, was saying that as soon as the case was called at the Privy Council, the two, Ish and Steve, were in the hands of the police and ready for extradition, and he, David West, gave instructions for them to be extradited. He said West was also alleging that the former Attorney General, Anand Ramlogan, intervened and instructed him to rescind those instructions to extradite so that the police wouldn't take action, which allowed them to go to court and restart the challenge, which continues up to this day. So in his witness statement, David West is saying that based after the Privy Council ruling, we were ready to put them two men on a plane and send them hither to the US to be tried. And the Attorney General at the time, Anand Ramlogan, who was David West's boss, based on this witness statement, instructed David West to rescind that decision. Right? This is what David West is saying in this witness statement that he has put up to support the claims that Dr. Rowley made about Anand Ramlogan's possible involvement in the Section 34 matter. It goes on. He added, David West, is going to say in court, as he said in the affidavit, that notwithstanding those instructions from the Attorney General, he continued to monitor what was happening, and he was pointing out that the conduct of the matter in the court was unusual, where the state, through the Attorney General, did not raise objections that ought to have been raised. Instead of objecting to bail, the Attorney General's lawyer took a neutral position in the court. He insisted this is all about Section 34, and the person who is in the middle of this who is responsible for this and has to be accountable for this is the Prime Minister. Rowley said the Prime Minister used the Parliament to create an Administration of Justice bill and misled the Parliament, gave us, the PNM, assurances that certain things will not be done, and then she led the Cabinet to extract things and to pass them into law by proclaiming them in secret. Today, we accuse the government of using the Parliament not just to terrorize our witness, but using Parliament in the furtherance of a crime that is the most heinous in the history of TNT. So, Section 34, they told us, was a mistake. They said the PNM and the UNC, everybody agreed to the bill. Why? Because the UNC went to the PNM opposition at the time and said, hey, what? We want all your support for this bill. And they knew why they wanted. They didn't need the support. They had the majority, 29 seats. But they knew if the S hit the fan later on, they could come and say, well, it's the whole Parliament voted for the bill, so don't look to blame us. The opposition and the government voted for this bill. The PNM voted for it too. And that is the nonsense that they're trying to push today. The supporters talking that stupidness. They buy that wholesale from the UNC and trying to sell it retail on social media. That the PNM, but the PNM agreed on the basis that certain things would be done and certain things would not be done. The agreement was that they would hire more masters of the court, they would build the judicial centers and all of these things, and that proclamation of the bill would not take place for at least 2 years while they were putting all of the infrastructure in place to facilitate full implementation of the bill. And it was on that basis that the PNM gave their support. The UNC said, we will not proclaim the bill, any part of the Administration of Justice bill, until all of the infrastructure is in place. Human resource infrastructure, physical infrastructure. And then when they went and proclaimed Section 34, right, where they, having proclaimed Section 34, right, where they went against what they promised the PNM because they said they would not proclaim any part of the bill until all these things were in place for at least 2 years. They went and pulled out Section 34, which could give their financiers a get-out-of-jail-free card. One of them was the man who, what we heard from Mark Bassant there, was the guy who masterminded, who created the whole strategy for the election campaign in 1995 to give him a get-out-of-jail-free card. And it was on that basis that Dr. Rowley made the infamous statement that we will not support anything that this government brings, right? That we will hound them out of office. That is the basis. That was the background and backdrop against which he made that statement that the opposition would not support any bills that the government brought, because the UNC betrayed the PNM. They lied and said they would not proclaim anything, and they pull out this one section. So when the supporters want to come and tell you, Rowley say that he would not support, the opposition would not support anything that the government brings, and that they would hound them out of office,